May 6th, 2026. We are in the 5th year and on day 72 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome. Welcome to this situation report. In today's report, we see fear of drone attacks on May 9th, drone attacks, and a very interesting sequence of hits in Crimea, as well as much more. We will look at territorial gains tomorrow because attacks are currently being reported in a rather remote area of the main front, and they are not over yet. That's why we'll wait for the next situation report. Otherwise, little has happened at the front. Stay tuned and look forward to tomorrow. The Ukrainian foreign minister accuses Russia of breaking a previously agreed ceasefire almost immediately. Of course, we're talking about the ceasefire from the 5th to the 6th May, which Ukraine introduced. According to him, despite the announced ceasefire, massive attacks continued during the night. We're talking about more than 100 drones, several missiles that were used over hours. The cities affected included Kharkiv and Zaporizhia. They were able to successfully hit a kindergarten in Sumy. There was also a glide bomb attack by Russian forces in the city of Druzhkivka. The impacts triggered massive fires and caused severe destruction in the city area. And this happened on a day when Russia could have proven otherwise. To ensure that during their parade on the 9th May, there will definitely be no disruptions. For Kiev, this is now much more than just a military incident. The Ukrainian leadership is directly questioning the credibility of Russian statements regarding a possible ceasefire from May 8th to 9th, especially with regard to the parade on the 9th. Now, Moscow is being accused of being more interested in the safe execution of the military parade on May 9th than in actual de-escalation. Thus, Ukraine also has the parade.
Am 9. Mai ohne Probleme stören.
The drones don't even have to hit. The air raid alarm or the noise of a shoot-down is more than enough. At the same time, there are many other worthwhile targets outside of Moscow that are now less well protected. We already looked at this problem on the Russian side last time. If they move air defense systems, then they simply don't have any left somewhere else. Because that's about where things stand at this point. In the last reports, we have repeatedly looked at other information as well. However, we have left one important aspect unaddressed so far. Of course, from a psychological perspective, it makes sense for Ukraine to attack the parade. It shows that the country, which has been fighting a defensive battle against what was then the second strongest army in the world for 1,533 days, would be able to reach the most heavily guarded city in Russia with drones. And the fact that they are hinting at something like this also makes sense, since Russia is continuing to reinforce the city, and important systems are being relocated to other places. So it makes sense. But there is a third point, one that we haven't fully looked at yet, because so far we've seen that within the Russian leadership, the likelihood of a coup attempt is higher than ever before. For years, the Kremlin's model worked mainly through control, stability, and the image of strength. But now, that very image is starting to crack. Tensions are growing internally. Behind the scenes, there seems to be increasing movement within the elite. There are reports of power struggles, mutual distrust, and even rumors about possible coup scenarios. At the same time, the state is responding with increasingly harsh security measures and greater isolation. And that's exactly what's noticeable. The more a system tries to visibly enforce control, the more obvious its fear of losing it often becomes. At the same time, external pressure continues to grow. Ukrainian attacks are reaching deeper and deeper into Russia. Refineries, airfields, rail logistics, and air defense systems, even far behind the front lines, have long been reached. And they are no longer considered safe. In addition, there are assassinations and acts of sabotage that show the vulnerability of this system has increased. Moscow, of all places, is particularly sensitive in this regard. Because if there were successful drone attacks around the time of the Victory Day parade, it would have enormous symbolic impact. Because it would directly hit the Kremlin's central promise to guarantee security and control. If even the capital cannot be fully protected during the country's most important military holiday, that would be a visible sign that this war has already reached Russia itself. And that's exactly where the real problem lies for Putin. The war continues, without any decisive success. A stalemate is looming at the front. At the same time, the costs keep rising, economically, militarily, and above all, politically. Many within the system now seem to realize that the current course not only burdens Russia's future, but also endangers their own positions. For a long time, many believed that Putin at least had a long-term plan, even if it was simply to continue the war endlessly. But now, doubts are apparently growing within Russia as to whether this plan even exists anymore. And when a power apparatus begins to doubt its own direction, something arises that can become especially dangerous for an authoritarian system. Uncertainty within the elite itself. And I have often said that this would be more serious for Russia than a capitulation at the front. But speaking of the front, how are things going at the front? Simply put, both sides are not doing well. Just because the Russians aren't making breakthroughs doesn't mean everything is going well on the Ukrainian side. Quite the opposite. But for Ukraine, it's already a success if the Russians aren't making significant progress at the front, while their drones are hitting oil depots and refineries in the hinterland and increasing the pressure. So far, they haven't been able to achieve any of their war goals, but they have to make progress at the front, while at the same time, depots like the one in Tuapse are blowing up around them. This blogger is upset and openly criticizes the leadership, calling the situation a disaster. People are dying at the front, and citizens are losing their minds. You've ruined everything, and you've destroyed people's faith in the government and the authorities, he says. Then he gets upset that the leadership is asleep, only talks but does nothing. In every city, a lot of young people are being buried because the commanders are leading them to the slaughterhouse. What the hell have you done to our country? He asked angrily, before hastily adding more insults and curses. Footage released by the Russian side shows a damaged Ukrainian heavy-duty drone of the E-300 type after a drone attack during its operation. What's interesting is not just the hit itself, but especially the reaction from the Russian side. Because despite visible damage, which we can clearly see, even Russian sources report that these drones can often keep flying and complete their missions. This is an additional problem for Russia. Apparently, even successful interception attempts no longer automatically guarantee that an attack can actually be stopped. At the same time, however, this case also shows why damaged systems are so extremely important for Ukraine. The affected unit of the Ukrainian armed forces is currently trying to repair exactly such E-300 drones instead of replacing them completely. This saves time, resources, and also allows operational systems to be brought back to the front more quickly. Because in the end, the whole thing is just a remote-controlled airplane that can carry one or more free-fall bombs. And that brings us right to the topic of avionics. The Russian military blogger Fighter Bomber, whom I like to quote because he usually reports very reliably from the Russian side, reports the loss of another Mi-8 helicopter. However, without specifying the reason, I assume that it happened again in the rear area or due to a technical issue and not because it was shot down. If I have more information about it, I will provide it as always. In occupied Crimea, another Ukrainian attack seems to have targeted important structures of the Russian occupation. One of the main targets, according to reports, was a building of the Russian Domestic Intelligence Service FSB in Armyansk. According to available information, several drones struck directly in the target area. What makes this especially sensitive is the location itself. There are said to be numerous accommodations and facilities around the building that are used by Russian military and security forces. As a result, the attack likely had a much greater impact than just on a single target itself, especially in terms of psychological effects. According to initial reports, at least 5 people lost their lives, while the number of injured is now estimated to be over 200, although I personally think this estimate is a bit high. If these numbers are confirmed, it would be one of the most serious attacks on Russian security structures in Crimea in recent months. But that's not all. Ukrainian military intelligence has further expanded attacks on Russian logistics in Crimea. The main focus was on the railway network, which plays a central role in transporting fuel, ammunition, and military equipment. According to the Special Unit Primary, several precision strikes were carried out directly on moving trains in April. The main targets were the locomotives themselves, which are used for military transport. A tank car was also hit. This is militarily relevant because such transports are extremely important for supplying Russian units, especially in Crimea and southern Ukraine. Without working rail logistics, moving equipment quickly over long distances becomes much harder. And that's exactly what these attacks seem to be targeting. This is particularly sensitive in Crimea. The peninsula is highly dependent on functioning supply routes, and that's exactly what's coming under heavy fire right now. But those weren't the only attacks in Crimea. A Russian BE-12 aircraft, 3 boats, and a support ship were also hit. So we have trains, planes, boats, supply units, and a building complex. The pattern is becoming clearer and clearer. First, the ferries used as a connection to Crimea were attacked. Meanwhile, air defense capabilities were reduced by attacks on air defense systems and 1 or 2 radars. And now targets further in the center of the peninsula are being attacked. Ukraine is dismantling Russia's military presence in Crimea piece by piece. And not just with a major attack, but through targeted strikes against exactly the elements that Russia needs there to exercise control. And with that, I thank you for all your suggestions. Thanks to subscribers, channel members, and the Albi crew. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Rennecke and Ferdinand Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, like, and comment. See you at the next Situation Report.